It's 9 p.m. here in the French capital. You're watching live from Paris on France 24. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. These are the top stories. With exactly 9 months until Election Day, the process of nominating the U.S. Democratic Party's choice of presidential candidate begins with the Iowa caucuses. Hong Kong closes more border crossings with the mainland China after medical workers go on strike demanding action to stop the spread of the coronavirus. And tensions between Turkish and Russian-backed Syrian forces escalate, with both sides trading fire in Idlib, resulting in the deaths of more than 20 people today. Welcome back. The process kicks off today for the nomination of the Democratic Party's choice of candidate who will challenge President Donald Trump in November. Well, with exactly 9 months to go until Election Day, the Iowa caucus is the first in a series of events across the US, and that whole process culminates in mid-July at the Democratic Party's National Nominating Convention in Milwaukee. Well, what happens in Iowa very much sets the tone for the leadership contest and will likely help narrow the field of 11 Democratic contenders. Well, in recent opinion polls, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden have been battling it out for the top spot. Well, France 24's Charlie James joins us now from central Paris. Now, Charlie, you're at a satellite Iowa caucus. That's pretty much got the same process here in Paris as it would have in Iowa, hasn't it?
Yes, that's exactly correct. There's still hours to go before the actual caucuses begin inside of Iowa. But here in this small room in the City Hall of the 2nd District of Paris, some of the first votes are about to be cast in the 2020 presidential election season. Right behind me, you're seeing caucus goers from abroad. So, of course, people from Paris, but also we've spoken to people from Italy, Germany, London, Cairo, who came here to this site to make sure that they got to participate in the Iowa caucuses themselves. So it's set up exactly the same way as it would be in Iowa. In just a matter of minutes, people will begin going and to the sections to support their candidates. There are probably about 15 people here, so they will need to get at least a couple of people, each candidate, to be able to be viable. But just as the caucuses happen in Iowa, there are supporters for candidates here trying to get undecided voters, trying to get candidates, people supporting candidates who are not viable, to come over to their side as well. So even though they're here in Paris, it's just as if they were in Iowa.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And just ask why is this happening? Because I don't remember hearing about the Iowa caucus satellite event in Paris in previous years.
That's because there hasn't been one in previous years. This is the first time that the Iowa Democratic Party has sanctioned these international satellite events. There are 3 international events, one here in Paris, one in Glasgow, and one in the country of Georgia as well happening. And they did it as part of an effort to make the Iowa caucuses more accessible. That's one of the criticisms about the caucus process, is that you have to be in a certain place at a certain time, which can be very difficult if you have children or if you work at night, or if you have a disability. So they've actually set up 99 different satellite locations for caucuses, most inside of Iowa, that are at hospitals or retirement centers or cultural centers, places where people might need a little more support to be able to understand the caucus process, or physical support, and it makes it easier for them to participate. But this is the first time that Iowa voters are able to participate in the process from overseas. So while the votes will be cast here early, they are going to be holding the results and not reporting those until the traditional Iowa precincts are reporting.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that update from Central Paris. France 24's Charlie James at a satellite Iowa caucus event. Thank you. Well, let's get some more analysis now on why the Iowa caucuses matter so much and what we can read into them. Let's cross to Richard Johnson, who is a lecturer in US politics and international relations at Lancaster University in the United States. Quite a lot of undecided voters there in Iowa, and they're also expecting a record turnout. That's making it quite difficult, isn't it, to try and predict the outcome? Because this time around it seems to be very different from previous Iowa caucuses. What are your thoughts?
Well, unlike last time, where it was really a two-horse race between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side, this time we have, maybe four candidates who could plausibly win this contest. In some ways, it does seem to be shaping up a bit more to a two-horse race, but those candidates who are less likely to win are still gathering a much more substantial share of the vote. And that really matters in Iowa because Iowa is a two-round process of voting. If candidates don't meet 15% of the vote in their local precinct, the supporters of those non-viable candidates get to cast effectively another vote. They get to support their second preference candidate. And so that adds a huge amount of unpredictability, which is really difficult to game just by looking at the headline poll results.
Yeah, it's extraordinary that, you're talking about a two-horse race in the previous round. And this time, we've got this diverse field. We've got men and women with young and old. And yet it does look like it's shaping up to be a race between two men, very much from the Democratic Party's old guard.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like in the latest polls that both Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are leading in the polls, and I think that if you were to make a kind of cautious bet, I think choosing one of those would be a reasonable choice. Look, Iowa is not one of the most diverse states in the United States, and that's been one of the criticisms of this contest, that this very rural, white, somewhat older state is setting the tone for the Democratic Party. And we've seen some very qualified non-white candidates like Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and Julian Castro, who have really struggled to break through in this contest. Not to say it's impossible. Barack Obama won Iowa in 2008, and that was the making of his candidacy. But in some ways, we've seen a race that's returned true to form this time round.
Okay, and just lastly, whoever remains in the race by Super Tuesday might ultimately end up confronting somebody different in the final throes of the leadership contest, because the former New York mayor Michael Bloomberg says he's going to miss all of this early stages of the process. He's going to wait until he can start fighting it out in the sort of more delegate-rich states. Is that a strategy likely to pay off for him, do you think?
We've never really seen that work in the past. We have heard candidates in the past try this. In the Republican primaries in, I believe it was 2008, Rudy Giuliani said he was going to not bother with Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina, and he's going to wait until a big state like Florida went to vote. And then he didn't do well enough in Florida, and he eventually didn't get the nomination. Maybe Bloomberg can make the case that he's got the resources, but the thing is that the importance of Iowa is not the number of delegates that this state gives out. It doesn't actually have that many delegates. It's about setting the tone, setting the narrative, the discussion, the attention, both in terms of what the media focuses on, but also in terms of who voters are paying attention to. And I think if a candidate sits these early states out, they're really going to struggle to break through.
Yeah, although you could argue that it's a crowded field there, and he'll stand out more and get more bang for his buck at a later stage when the numbers have been whittled down a bit. Let's wait and see. Thank you very much, though, for joining us, Richard Johnson, lecturer in US Politics and International Relations at Lancaster University in the United Kingdom. Thank you.
Thank you.
More than 360 people are now known to have died in China as a result of the coronavirus, which has now spread to 23 other countries and regions, and which the World Health Organization has declared to be a global emergency. But Beijing is accusing Washington of spreading fear and whipping up panic over the virus with travel restrictions and evacuations. Well, meanwhile, Hong Kong, which has been rocked by months of protests, announced earlier today that it's closing more border crossings with the mainland. This follows strike action by medical workers there in the former British colony, who are calling for more action from the authorities to contain the virus. France 24's Yuka Roya tells us more.
This group is among the hundreds of healthcare workers who went on strike, demanding government action.
If we don't shut down the border from mainland China, the community outbreak in Hong Kong would happen very soon.
If they don't ban people with the new coronavirus from getting into Hong Kong, all medical work is meaningless.
As well as a border closure, striking medical workers are asking the government to step up efforts to effectively contain the spread of the new coronavirus. Hospital Workers Union, HAEA, is threatening to continue the action until their demands are met. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam has suspended high-speed rail services to the mainland and cross-border ferries, but has stopped short of closing the entire border. Live produce continues to come from China, even though the source of the outbreak is still unconfirmed. About 90% of the city's food is imported, with the bulk coming from the mainland.
I don't agree with shutting down our borders. If we do that, Hong Kong's economy will definitely suffer, and we will end up with no food to eat.
The epidemic is expected to pile pressure on Hong Kong's economy, which sank into recession in the third quarter of last year, as pro-democracy protests gripped the city for months, hitting its retail and tourism sectors hard.
Now, Turkish and Syrian troops have been trading fire in northwestern Syria today, resulting in the deaths of more than 20 people. At the same time, and in the same area of Idlib province, Russian airstrikes have resulted in the deaths of 14 civilians. Well, this escalation in tensions between Turkish and Russian-backed Syrian forces is the deadliest since Ankara deployed troops to Syria in 2016. France 24's Nick Rushworth has this update.
Ankara says it will continue to fight after several Turkish soldiers were killed in Syrian government shelling in Idlib province. The violence in the region is fueling tensions between Turkey and Russia, the two main foreign protagonists in Syria. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan warned Moscow to respect accords aimed at stopping the fighting in the country.
We hope that each party will fulfill its obligations under the Astana and Sochi agreements, and that we will be able to work within these obligations.
Turkish and Syrian forces traded fire a few hours after a Turkish military convoy entered Idlib province to step up its presence there. Moscow says Ankara failed to notify the Russian army about troop movements and that Turkish forces had come under Syrian fire targeting militants linked to al-Qaeda. Ankara says Russian and local authorities had been informed. Syrian government forces, backed by Russian air power, have been trying to regain control of Idlib. Turkey, which supports several rebel groups there, wants that offensive to stop, fearing a mass influx of refugees.
Well, the United Nations says that the increasing violence there in northwestern Syria has led to the displacement of more than 388,000 people since December, and tens of thousands of people have been pushing their way towards the Turkish border. Well, Turkey, which already hosts more than 3 million Syrian refugees, says it fears another mass influx. France 24's Karis Garland has more.
Deserted streets, homes destroyed, and market stalls laid bare. Assessing the piles of rubble, Syrian father of four Wael bids farewell to his hometown of Sarakeb in Idlib province, the latest target in the government's offensive on rebel-held territory.
I'm here to see my neighborhood one last time, and maybe I won't be able to see it again. Look at the scene. I wish I didn't come to see it, because it's heartbreaking. We civilians are the ones who are paying the price, and nobody cares.
Now in control of roughly 70% of the country, Russia-backed government forces are ramping up their push to retake the opposition's last major stronghold in Idlib and parts of the Aleppo region. In Syria's northwest, Idlib is home to 3 million people, many of whom are displaced from other areas of the country. The government sent tens of thousands of civilians and rebel fighters to the province in 2018 as part of surrender deals following an assault on the southwest. Idlib is dominated by a former al-Qaeda affiliate, but allied rebel groups are also present. People living there have been awaiting the government's looming final offensive. The recent escalation of the assault has pushed tens of thousands to the border with Turkey, which already hosts about 4 million Syrian refugees. The United Nations estimates almost 390,000 have fled their homes in northwest Syria since December 1st last year.
Now, the head of the French Skating Federation has been facing a grilling today following a string of accusations of sexual abuse and rape by a coach who targeted underage skaters. Well, a book published last week contains detailed testimony put forward by a 10-time French champion with accusations of rape dating back to the 1990s. France 24's Julia Seeger tells us more.
After 30 years, she finally decided to tell her story. In a book published last week, the 10-time French skating champion Sarah Abitbol writes that her former coach, Gilles Bayer, raped her when she was just 15. Repeated abuse that shattered her life.
I would be sleeping with my teddy bears and he would wake me up with his torch. It was a nightmare. It was horrible, and it's still horrible today. And that's why I'm talking about it, because unfortunately I'm still not well. I'm taking antidepressants. And so I'm speaking up to break the silence and to help all the other victims who can't speak for themselves.
Last week, Coach Bayer admitted he had had intimate and inappropriate relationships with Abitbol. The French champion was not the only skater to have been sexually abused. 3 other professional skaters have come forward with similar accusations against 3 coaches, including Bayer. Making matters worse, Coach Bayer had already been investigated by France's sports ministry back in the early 2000s. His contract was terminated, but he remained close to the Skating Federation. In the wake of these revelations, the French sports minister has asked the head of the French Skating Federation to resign.
I expect Mr. Gayagé to take responsibility for what has been written in the newspapers. And I will be very firm, including in terms of the sanctions against those who have been accused.
Similar stories of abuse from swimmers and tennis players in France have also recently been unveiled, shedding light on the broader scope of the problem within French sports federations.
Now, although the public transport network here in the Paris region is now operating as usual, strike action against government plans to streamline the pension system continue. Well, employees of 3 waste incinerators have walked off the job, and for 10 days now there's been a growing pile of rubbish on pavements in and around the French capital. Well, this non-collection of household waste is causing quite a stink. Nevertheless, MPs are going to be examining the pension reform bill for the next 2 weeks. Well, as France 24's Karis Garland now explains, lawyers and health workers have also joined the industrial action.
Unwilling to give up the fight, lawyers have been protesting against the government's proposed pension reform since the beginning of January. It's paralysed a number of courts around France, forcing hearings to be pushed back.
It has an impact on everyone. Lawyers don't enjoy not going to court to defend and support their clients, often when the defence is already fragile. But unfortunately, it's the only means we currently have to be heard.
Lawyers fear their special autonomous pension plan will be called into question, and more specifically, the inclusion of their self-financed pension fund in the universal system. According to them, it would mean having to double their contributions. Hospital workers are also fighting the reform and have taken to the streets to protest working conditions.
The conditions have declined and are unacceptable at times. I would like to be able to do my job better and have more time to do it within frustrating situations every day. And I tell myself that if the government was really aware of this, it would act, because healthcare is one of the pillars of our society.
Over 1,000 doctors have resigned from their administrative functions, including anything not directly related to patient care or research. 71 MPs began examining the controversial pension reform bill on Monday. They have just 2 weeks to review 70 articles before the bills are subjected to discussions in Parliament on February 17.